Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar TD 6.1 DBPipe for desktop and browser apps. I'm your host, Martin Tietz. During the webinar, if you have any questions that you would like to have answered by me or by our speaker, Jean-Marc Gemperle, I'd like to ask you to put your questions into the WebEx Q&A tool. That's a tool that has a question mark on it, or to put them into the chat. We will answer your questions probably towards the end of the webinar, but you can type them in whenever you want, and we are going to handle them at the end of this session. A few words about Unify. Unify is more than 30 years in the business of development tools and database products. Unify has developed the first Unix SQL database called Data Server, the first Unix 4GL development tool, Excel, the first DOS and Windows SQL database, which is SQL Base, and then also SQL Windows, which was the first Windows 4GL for Windows database applications, and with Team Developer, the first Windows 32-bit 4GL a few years ago. Unify doesn't only have tools and database, we also have Access One archiving solutions, Dage's e-discovery solutions, Oracle Forms to Java migration, and Lotus Notes to .NET migration. If you're interested in those, please go to our website and get in contact with us. Jean-Marc Gemperle is our speaker today. He is a very senior, one of the most senior team developer specialists Unify has. He has been working more than 10 years with Unify and is in backline support and consulting, and he will probably be able to answer all of your questions that you will have regarding DBPipe today. A few words about Team Developer 6.1 that is going to be released quite soon, actually. We will provide a new, very high productivity IDE for you. We will provide new enhanced high usability GUI controls and powerful new .NET integration that allows you to leverage your investments into the existing Team Developer code and other .NET code you have created. So things like web services providing and web services consuming, and parts of that you will, of course, see during Jean-Marc's presentations. With that, I'd like to hand over to Jean-Marc, and I'll unmute him and make him the presenter so he can share his desktop. Jean-Marc, you're a presenter.
Yes.
We can see your desktop now.
You can see my desktop?
Yes.
Okay, so let's get started. First of all, hi everybody. So today we're going to talk about DBPipe for desktop and browser applications. Well, DBPipe was already introduced as a name called Add Proxy with the version 6.0. People started to use slowly this feature of Team Developer, and they quickly realized that actually it was quite complicated. The reason for that is because the DBPipe at the time was hosted only on IIS, and for a lot of people, most of the people are development developers, users, they had some kind of problem with IIS. So what we do have now is in version 6.1, we have something that is new related to DBPipe and the way we can use and host this technology, which probably is going to make it more and more interesting. Let me remind you that the goal of DBPipe is simply to share database access on a remote server so that the client doesn't need to have anything installed locally in terms of database client to access your database. So we're going to learn through the agenda, and very briefly, because I want to insist more on the demo and the presentation, because that's going to be probably much more clear than sets of slides, that DBPipe is based on web services, and thus the technology being used there is Windows Communication Foundation. Then we're going to have an highlight and a quick look about DBPipe, what's DBPipe exactly, and we will see that you can actually host DBPipe in multiple ways, either as desktop, as Windows service, or running on or hosted on IIS. And then finally, as I say, the demo, which I hope is going to explain you more about DBPipe and more some kind of difficulty about the configuration of these tools. It should normally clarify it to you, and I only have about set of 11 slides to go through and then directly go into the demo, and then finally we're going to see the questions and the answers. So what's Windows Communication Foundation? I could have put much more slides about it because it's a huge technology. It's a Net API in the .NET framework. And basically, it's to create a Windows service, or if you prefer, even web services. So in effect, you can consider DBPipe to be a kind of a web service, and the goal, basically the business logic or the layer that it will support is simply your transaction that the client does to the database. Okay. So what's nice is that you can separate the logic with web services. As you know, just put your logic there. In this case, database access is on one side, and all the UI is on the other side. The technology of DBPipe really makes sense when you're using what we'll see very briefly, which is the XBAP type of application or web application. It's one-click installation technology from Microsoft, because the interesting things about this is that you can also automatically install application on client machine without and actually also make update without them having to go through setup and things like that. So a lot of corporate customers are very interested about this technology. So basically, in essence here, I just say that DBPipe here is using VCF technology, which is the latest from Microsoft, and it's a very versatile technology. We'll see that. Why WCF and not an ASP.NET Web Services? Well, if you read on the internet about what's WCF, you'll find out that it can do web services, but it can do so much more, like services. The idea is that you can host, those services either, on IaaS, or either as a simple server, an executable that runs on your machine as a process. Well, actually, everything is a process, but it runs on your machine. And it's that versatile that you could even host it, for people that remembers about it, COM+. And beyond that, also WCF is known to be very performing and very versatile, because it offers you what we call bindings, and the bindings are here it's a kind of a protocol that allows you to be used in different scenarios whenever you want to access the service through the internet or not through the internet, performance, security, and so on. So that's the reason why we are using WCF as the main technology for DBPipe. So let's have a quick look about what DBPipe is all about. On the right side, you see Unified DBPipe Client. As you can see, those can be desktop exe, so this is new, so simply the symbol of team developer. And over here, Firefox and Internet Explorer. Firefox needs to have the XBAP plugin if you create an application, right, a browser application. So basically, any team developer type of application, that are, of course, .NET application, can directly talk to our DBPipe technology, which is in fact a server, no more no less, that can be hosted here on IaaS, that can be a desktop exe GUI, so pretty much like, see if you know SQL base in the console, it's also a server, right? And with this DBPipe and UI, you are being able to see the transaction that the client actually sends to the server. And then you can also have Windows services. The idea then is to be able to connect to, database. So on Unified DBPipe server here, you can have the service running there. You can have on the same machine, actually you must have on the same machine, the client of the database, so the .NET data provider, because we are talking about .NET, which can be SQL base, Oracle, SQL Server, and Sybase. That's what we support. And those guys will talk directly to the database server to actually make the request, the selects, inserts, and so on. So basically, this database here can also be on that same machine over here. So, as I say, you can have different hosting of web services, and all team developer .NET application can actually use DBPipe. DBPipe server desktop overview. So now we're going to talk about server, because as you can understand, I believe up till now, you have a part which is client and a part which is server. So let's have first a look at the server. The client connects indirectly to supported DB via WCF service. DBPipe is no more a server that is running as a desktop application. Actually, over here, when you're going to install Team Developer 6.10, you're going to see that there is a new directory called DBPipe server, in which there is a simple exe over here. If you double-click on this guy, it will open a user interface console in which you will start the DBPipe server. Internally, the DBPipe server uses Unified TD Runtime WCF server, DLL, and the runtime database. So actually, this is what handles what the web services uses, the WCF web services in a way. And of course, we are using our runtime database. Why? Because if you do a SQL prepare and execute, and a SQL commit, if you use store procedure, all that goes through this layer, so that your existing application can actually use directly these web services and make the request to the database. So as I say, we do support all the .NET data provider, the one like SQL Base, Oracle Data Access, System Data, DBC, which is SQL Server. In this case, and also Sybase, I didn't mention over here, but we do support it. The target database client must be, of course, properly installed. So if you have DBPipe, that server must also have all the clients you wish to target, to use on the same machine. So obviously, the client needs to be properly installed to be able to talk to the database server. The actual database server can reside on the DBPipe server site, localhost, or any other remote machine. So again, the DBPipe goals are simple: allow TD client application using DBPipe to use remote DB resource, avoiding DB resources on the client. Some kind of thin client concept. It's not exactly that, but it goes close to this idea. So the DBPipe server desktop.exe, we'll see that more in detail in the demo, relies on configuration file for actually configuring the endpoint, which is very important for web services or for WCF, and also actually the address where that you're going to use. So basically over here you can see that you have a config file. This is the default config file, which point, so here you can see that the SQL Base, that the server, listen on all the network interface on the port 8000, and basically it's going to process your request. There are a couple settings over here that you could change: the port, the address, and also what you can do is to specify, how do you say that, the SQL Base path to the SQL Base API. This is only for SQL Base user, because you really need to point to the right API, right? And then the proxy to process allow you to either use in multiple, have one process of DBPipe running and have multiple threads for each connections handling your request, or separate them in terms of process. So if you would set to true this value over here, you would see multiple process on your task manager on the server. DBPipe desktop client overview. So now that we talked about the server is very simple. You just have to launch it. You rely on the existing port that you just configured or use the default, and that's it, is ready to listen. Now you need to have a client to work with it. So a client is a teamdeveloper.net desktop.exe application, building to exe. So it can be a desktop.exe application, but it can also be an XDAP application. Building the exe generates now, and this is new, a DBPipe desktop client exe config file. If you take the version 6.0, you'll see that there was no config file generated when the exe file was generated. This config file allows you to actually configure the client of the application to talk with the WCF service. You will see that there are two supported bindings. No detail over here, otherwise it would take too long, but we'll see that in the demo. Default DB connection are local or remote through use remote connection setting. This is a very important setting. At the time in the version 6.0, lots of people had difficulty about that, because it was in a way kind of funny, because people thought they were actually using DBPipe hosted on IIS, kind of a black box. But in fact they were not, because what they were doing is that they were testing it on the client side, right? And because they had all the database connectivity, and because the default value was to use the connectivity components on their machine, and they had it, they actually when directly connecting using the database client, bypassing DBPipe. And when they were deploying the application or try to use the URL or the XBAP application on a remote machine, all of a sudden things didn't work. They had weird errors. And one of the errors they had is because a lot of people didn't use domain. And credential and authentication, we only supported authenticated clients on the version 6.0. So that means that if you were not part of the same domain, you could actually not connect. So this setting is very important. You can force actually to say, yes, I really want to use DBPipe no matter what, on which machine I am. And the default being auto, simply to maintain the existing compatibility. That means if you make a .NET application, you're going to have an exe config file being generated, and you still want to connect, well, locally without DBPipe. So the auto keyword makes sense, but you have this option to force actually what you want to be there. Once properly configured and tested, you can actually use Team Developer Build Installer. We'll see that in the demo, and then you can actually see how it works with DBPipe. Again, the goal is very simple. It's just to avoid to have client components on the local machine where you execute the application. In WVCS, the ABC keyword is what matters. So the address is very important. So the server uses bindings, right, like NetTCP and WS 2007 HTTP binding. Those are the two bindings that we actually support. There are many more bindings exposed in WCS, but we only use those ones. NetTCP binding is supposed to be much faster than WS 2007 binding. By default, when you generate an exe file, in .NET, we're going to use the NetTCP IP binding, and we're going to try to talk directly to the DBPipe desktop exe, so that you have the opportunity to actually test your settings. Over here, what you can see is the configuration file. So you can see that we're defining two bindings. You can use one or the other. Here we've put a comment simply because you have the possibility to actually change the binding, and the default binding that we are using is actually the .NET TCP binding. And as you remember, localhost 8000, that means to talk directly to our DBPipe exe server. And then, as I say again, the use remote connection is very important keyword. DBPipe Server Desktop and Server Console GUI. So, as I say to you, we have a desktop exe. We have multiple ways of hosting DBPipe through IAS as a simple exe, which is a service which will expose you a GUI, which will also allow you to be able to see the log with different settings of verbose or less level. And the idea is that those applications, whether they are XBAP application or desktop.exe, can, if they want, talk to the desktop exe server, or also to IAS, which is, I didn't show over there, right? So here I'm talking only about the DBPipe server desktop, all right, which is this component. And basically you make your access to your database. We also do provide DBPipe server WinSVC. So in the DBPipe, when you install Team Developer 6.1, I mentioned you that you have a directory called DBPipe. Inside you have unified DBPipe server WinSVC.exe. It's just an extra feature. I mean, if you don't want to launch manually the desktop exe, which contains the UI, and don't want to use auto startup, from your computer, it obviously makes sense if you don't want to log into your machine to install it as a service. Actually, to install it as a service, you use this tool from .NET, install util, and you basically then can start and stop your service. And then you can also check the transaction being done on the server through the event log. What is a nice feature with the DBPipe desktop exe is that it's not a black box. You are actually seeing what's happening live, and you can actually test the technology. That's one of the reasons we put that in. But ultimately, the people will host it as a Windows service, or even better on IAS. Over here, this is a very summarized slide about DBPipe server IAS. We will see that when you create a Windows .NET application, you actually can automatically publish, your application along DBPipe. It's called database proxy server, directly on IIS, which appears here and which appears in my inetpub www root. You remember that I say that there are multiple ways to activate the service. So over here, obviously, I need to have the World Wide Web Services service running, and there needs also to be the Windows Process Activation service running. All right. At this point, you can actually start to test DBPipe simply by giving the URL, and if everything is working fine, you should get this screen. If there is an error, well, we'll talk about it in the demo very quickly. Then you have to check actually the setup of Windows and install the right component from .NET, because if you have Windows 7, everything is not installed automatically. All right, and then at the end, the idea is actually you can publish an application. I'm sorry for all the error. I don't know if it makes sense, but if you think about it, it should make sense. Over here, this is a request of an XBAP application that is deployed over here or published over there, and of course, it's going to use DBPipe server if everything is configured. So as I say, the idea is very simple. The configuration might confuse people, right? Because we are talking about web application, we are talking about desktop exe application, service that are hosted in different ways, and all that might make it confusing. And actually, well, it's not complicated, but it's quite error prone. So what I'm going to do now is to go directly into the demo. So because there is quite something to see over here, I prepare kind of a roadmap about my demos. So let's start to have a look at what I have over here. So over here I have a Windows machine. This is my host machine that you can see. And this host machine is my development machine. I have Team Developer installed. If you look at over here, I have Oracle, SQL Server, and SQL Base installed. So basically it's a development machine, right? You know how to use Team Developer. You start by doing an application. And basically, I do have one application which is no more nor less the sample that we used back at the version 6.0 in DEF CON, which is the VPF demo. The only things I did, though, is to change this application to be able to use Oracle and SQL Server, just to see something else than SQL Base. So over here, we simply have a normal application, right? You know about this. We also have a SQL INI actually in the same directory, and you can see that it's very simple. It's exactly what you should know since already 20 years with Unify. It's a standard SQL INI. The only things I want is to connect to Oracle, being able to connect to SQL Server, and that's it. There's nothing, it's just the standard stuff, right? So now I want to use that application, that VPF demo that you might know. It's quite a nice application that uses a lot of UI, etc., etc. So I'll show you that this application, if I go into the build settings, is a .NET VPF desktop exe. Nothing new for the moment. The only thing that is new is that it's a .NET application, right? So you have to first migrate your Win32 application, have a .NET application, and then you can start to think about using DBPipe technology if you're interested about it, and especially also the XBAP application for the ease of installation on the client side. So we do have a desktop exe. So first things to do is to build our executable. Okay, so I'm opening actually here a bit so that I don't lose track of what I want to show you. I show you the SQL INI, open the app and build setting desktop exe, build the exe, and now you remember I told you the difference with 6.0 compared to 6.1 is that now we do generate a config file. This didn't exist at the time of 6.0 when you were building the executable. So let me go in XML because it's more readable. So over here, I'm building a desktop exe, and by default, it's going to try to use the client, the DBPipe server, right? So over here, you can see that the only things that matter really is the address, the binding, and the contract, the ABC things of WCF. And actually, really the most important you will see in the demo is this, guys, the URL, the address. Wherever you want to use DBPipe hosted as a desktop exe or IIS, that is what matters. All right. So this was just to show you the config file. Okay. The binding used is NetTCP/IP, and we don't use WS2007. All right. So this is just what we decide to do on our side, and it's the default. Okay. Now what I'm going to do? Just one second. Yeah. Okay, check the config, execute DBPipe server.exe. So what I'm going to do is now execute DBPipe server.exe. I told you that when you're going to install 6.1, you're going to have DBPipe in that directory installed for you. So let me just launch the server, and as you can see, there is a UI appearing. The server is running and just tell you, hey, I'm listening on TCP/IP on this machine. GM Gameplay is my host name on port 8000, right? So that's what happens, okay? And then the idea now is actually to test, what I built, right? So let me try to launch this application and see what's going to happen. So I want to connect to Oracle. I'm going to go. Just take a bit time, and now we have the application. Well, it's nice, it's working, right? But does this actually mean that I'm accessing, DBPipe, that I'm using the DBPipe feature? What you can see over here is no. There's nothing that happened. Normally, I should see much more things happening over there. So you can already see that something didn't work over here. Well, it's very easy. The default of the building a desktop exe application is to not necessarily use, the DBPipe server. And you remember this configuration that I mentioned. So if I go back into the settings, we say over here that use remote connection equal auto. And because I'm on my development machine, right, I'm actually using directly my database client. So I'm not using DBPipe. So what I want to do is to force it. Okay. The other things, because we also want to test another machine, I want to also, where am I at it, change to my host name. So now if I do file, save, make sure that everything is all right. And now if I launch again the desktop exe with the altered configuration, normally if I didn't do any mistake, I should be able to see things happening there, which starts to happen, right? So I can see that this is very easy, right? For the moment, there's nothing really special. The default is already configured for you to use the DBPipe server exe. Now, the goal, obviously, let me close this guy. Actually, I'm still going to leave that guy. Let me see. So, Janayana, VM machine. Okay, close DBPipe server.exe. So let me close this guy. Just worked a bit on the step of the demo so that everything makes sense. So I close the DBPipe server. Now we want to use another machine because sure, it's going to work on the development machine. Everything is there. It's the idle configuration. So now what about just using a virtual machine? So let me see, where's my virtual machine? Over here I have Windows XP. Let me explain the environment. So this is the host and this is the guest, right? And this guest, or the VM machine if you prefer, actually is a vanilla blank machine. There is no database connectivity. It's the worst case scenario. It's Windows XP. It's quite old, Service Pack 3. And I can prove you that there is absolutely nothing about Unify or .NET on this machine apart .NET Framework 3.5. There's actually not even Oracle connectivity because there should be Oracle data access, and there isn't there, right? So there is nothing there, right? So the goal is me to run, that same application on this machine. So what are you doing? Well, since version 6.0, we provided something that allows you to create an installer. We tested it on our dev machine. Now the goal is to see if it works on our vanilla blank XP machine. Just before building the setup, I just want to emphasize the fact that versioning is very important in .NET. Right? Both for XDAP but also for setup. Every time you change your setup, you theoretically should increment your setup to be able to install a new version, right? Or you can use the same version, but it needs the setup needs the product must have been installed before. Anyway, let me build the setup. So the DBPipe demo, all this information comes from the version information. Now I'm generating an MSI file, and Team Developer will actually package everything in MSI and all what is needed. Okay? The generation of the setup has been finished. All right. So now let me go back on my virtual machine, which is there. Actually, over here I have a shortcut to an already existing setup. You can see that nothing exists at the moment. So here, this is exactly the same place where I just built, if you look at the time, the setup. So now let me just run the setup. Okay, and now if everything's fine, my setup has been completed and I have a DBPipe demo. All right, now what you can see is that Team Developer Package and install everything that is needed actually to run the application without putting anything in the GSE. So it's all contained in that directory. And the config file that we just changed, of course, is packaged there. So the goal is, can I use that application and connect to the database server and DBPipe on this machine? Well, let's have a look. So let me go in the executable. Let me launch it, and let's go to Oracle. Okay, what happens is, I look in Task Manager. For the moment, nothing happens, right? If I look at over there, I'm not sure I launched it. Just 1 second. Yes, it's there. It's sitting there, right? Why? Simply because my server is not running. So if I'm launching the server now, after some little moment, it should actually start to initiate the connection. And you see it happening, right? Now let me close that. And now you can see that I have a Windows XP machine, totally blank, without no database connectivity. Actually, so that's my VM machine to get. Actually, using the server, the desktop exe, connecting to Oracle, my service, which is there. I mean, because the machine contains both the server, the client, right? This is the host machine. So basically, you could see that is very, in a way, easy, and I suppose that this demo should actually demystify you a bit if you started to use the version 6.0 of DBPipe, because thanks to this, UI, you can actually see if everything is okay, and if indeed you are using it. Okay, so that was the part of using desktop exe. Now let's talk about DBPipe IAS. It's a bit more complicated, so let me really follow, my point over here. So I created the same directory, which was a copy of the previous application. There's no difference with the previous application, right? There is no difference, sorry. And the things that is important is that the SQL INI, again, is exactly the same. Over there, you just do what you used to be able to do before. No big deal. Now, what I'm going to do, let me close a bit everything over here. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is to load this in the IDE and show you. All right. So now, and show you that the build settings, right, is the .NET VPS XBAP application, so a web browser application, type of application. Okay, so the idea now is to, like before, to build and sorted all the things by time. So the idea is to build the XBAP application. What's going to be generated over here, you see, is the executable, of course, the XBAP, the manifest, and the config file. All those guys are important for XBAP, and especially the manifest and XBAP we see further on in the demo. Again, it's always a good idea to actually check our configuration, because don't be fooled that you still have some responsibility to override some settings there whenever you need. So it's always a good idea to actually look at it. Okay, so let's have a look at it. Actually, there's no big difference compared to the previous one. Over here, all what I see is that it wants to use again my DBPipe server, exe, right? So let me go back into the. So we know what has been generated, and we have seen the config file. Let me see. Now the goal is actually to publish this XBAP application and the DBPipe server on my IAS server. A bit like when I created the installer, for a normal, regular desktop exe. Now I want to start to publish this. So basically what I do is to go in project publish, right? And over here, you have the option to say, I want to publish. First, I just forget to say something. Over here, I have IAS, right? Over here, in my root directory of IAS, I have absolutely nothing. I still have my web server running as www root over here, right? So the idea now is to actually publish the DBPipe server along the XBAP application on IIS. So for that, you're going to publish. Okay. What I want is to publish it, GM Gameplay, and the password is just the access to IIS. Use Windows credential. You remember the time that I said to you on version 6.0, this option wasn't there. So if you didn't have a machine connected to domains, you actually wouldn't be able to use the feature. If you use workgroup, you have one DBPipe IIS server running somewhere and another one, and the client, on the same network but not connected to the domain, it wouldn't work. You could not be authenticated. So that's why actually I'm uncheck use the Windows credential to connect, right? Then I want to generate default web page. We will see. That's actually to get the certificate and just to see a nice, starting web page to run our XBAP application. And what is important also is the certificate, because you will see also in the demo later on is that an XBAP application has full trust. That means when running on your machine, it has the full access on your machine, so that file access or whatever is just working fine. So I don't think I did any mistake. So now let me publish. Something happened, and let's now see, in InetPub, indeed over here I have my XBAP application that has been deployed along the DBPipe server hosted by IIS. Right? Okay, so this is now done. Let me also show you that you have now applications. Those are applications, and that's the DBPipe server as an application, virtual directory, as well as the application there. What you can see also is that this has been deployed. All right. There's nothing you can change over here directly and expect it to work. I will explain also that later on. Okay, so let me go back on my demo. Okay, show generator file, explain what has been building, publish product, so I did that. Show W, etc., etc. So now, access host, DBPipe server as WC. The first things and the most important, if you want to use DBPipe, is to make sure that your web services actually, or DBPipe, is actually working. So you want to check actually if this guy is working. So over here I just saved a URL which actually points to my DBPipe web server. That's a service. That's a Windows service. It will take some time to wake up because I just publish, he activates it. And if you don't see this screen, right, then there is something that is wrong. It's simply because you didn't install the handler. If that's the case, well, you have to contact the support or you have to search on the internet. But basically, WCF on Windows 7 with .NET 3.5 installed by default are not installed automatically. So you have to actually install the handlers. And you remember I told you it's no more nor less a web services, right? So I'm fine for the moment. That has been deployed correctly, right? Now, what I want to do is actually test, my XBAP application, right? That has been deployed, as I say again, because it's here and because it's in www root, it's all there, right? So one of the things you have to understand is that XBAP applications are automatically installed. You don't have to run a setup, and they are versioned automatically. The version is handled automatically. So because I play a couple times, to make sure my demos are working, I'm going to empty my cache. There is multiple ways two ways actually I know of emptying an XBAP cache of the application, because you'll see what happens. Either you run this command, run DLL, blah, 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 or you're using the .NET tool mage with the command line -cc switch to actually clear the cache, as cc means, right? So I clear the cache, and now over here, I do have, my application. So you remember when I published, I say, well, I want to see the main page, right, or a page that introduced me about the application. Most important, the first time you're executing your XBAP application, because you are full trust, you're supposed to actually, execute or use the certificates. So I'm just going to do it for the first store. You just download this certificate. Then you could do next. The password for your information is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the default certificate that we provide. You can request other certificates to other certificates authority. But anyway, that's the default one, right? And then next. And then you want to place them in the store, like it's explained over here. And then I'm just going to put it in the first store. Okay, and now it says that the import is successful. Then you have to do it also for the Trusted Root Certificate Authority. I'm going to do it there because I already did. And then what I want to do is start to first run my application and see what happens. You can see that the application gets downloaded and actually got on the fly installed. Okay, now the next step is to actually test my application. Is it working? Yes, no problem. The question is, am I really using DBPipe? Well, that's not for sure. So let me close this guy here. Just one sec. Because now, okay, so I close that. Oh, let me go back there, clear the cache, execute. It should work, but DBPipe is not used since the machine has a connectivity component and user remote connection equal auto. You remember, it's exactly the same issue as the desktop exe. So let's see if our application is working actually on the virtual machine. So I go on the virtual machine here, right? And actually, I also going to clear any application that has been already executed, the cache. So I clear the cache. Takes sometimes, okay? And now let me attempt to load the application. I'm not going to go through download the certificate again because it already has done on this machine and they're in the right store. Now let me try to run the application. As you can see again, it downloads the application because I just cleared the cache. When you next run the application, this is not done anymore. Now I want to connect to Oracle and let me try to see what happens. Well, that doesn't sound that good. I have a very cryptic error, or maybe not that much for me because I'm reading the config file. I know what bindings are, address, and all what matters in WCF. So basically say to you, well, HTTP is invalid, it expects NetTCP. So you can already have a sense that, you know, the system is not using the same bindings from the server and the client. So why is that? You know, I just deployed very easily the things. So what you can also see is that, you know, the database access is independent of the UI. The UI just appears there, right? So let me close that, okay? And then we have that error. So what we want first is to understand our bindings, right? So let me see if I can close this guy. Yes. So I go to INetPub. I go to www.root. Let me close this guy because, okay, one sec. I go in the DBPipe server. The web config is the settings of my DBPipe server. So let me load it into Notepad++. Show the color because it's more easy. And let me do the same for the application. So this is the server, and now this is the client. Somewhere around here. Config deploy. Okay. Language XML. What you can see is that the server still defines two types of binding, WS2007 and NetTCP, right? But the service, and especially the endpoint, wants to use WS2007 HTTP binding. Now let's have a look at the config file, you know, that has been deployed. Well, you can see that there is a mismatch. We're using NetTCP, right? So how do you fix this problem? Actually, you just have to, let me go back into the demo. So the reason why you have this error is because you analyze the two config files and you can see there is a difference in the binding using the server and the client. So basically, what you can do, the only difference actually is this guy here. You don't want to use this one, but you want to use this URL or this address, because actually it's an address. Let me see this one. I don't do any mistake. I leave that guy open over here, so I go now to republish. Is that mine? No, I don't think that was. I still have. Maybe I've closed it. Just one sec. Reopen it. Publish. Okay. Now I don't care, you know, about I don't care about redeploying my DBPipe server on IAS, but the only things I care is to change the address over here. So this is what I'm going to do, and actually you can probably recognize the port 8000. It's because I want the XBAP application to go against my DBPipe server exe over here. So let me try to publish that, and I don't forget to untick the use Windows credential. Now the publish got finished, and now if I click over there, normally I should see the change appearing over there, which is right, okay? So the change appeared there. What next is I go back into my virtual machine, I republish everything, not everything, but just this small change, you know, on my, minimize that, on my IAS server. And now again, because the application has been cached, I just want to clear it, just to make sure I'm using the right stuff. So now let me try to launch again the application. It's going to get re-downloaded. Which it does. Okay. Now let me try to connect to Oracle. Sometimes you can do easily mistakes, you know, but I don't think I did any mistakes there. But what you can see is that nothing happened. Yeah, because I didn't start my DBPipe server exe. So let me launch it. And if I didn't do any mistake, after a few seconds, things should start to pop up. Hopefully. Okay, here we go. So what is nice now is you have an XBAP application on an empty vanilla XP machine. Everything is running on local though here. Don't get confused. It's not true web application. Everything is local. You have the full trust. That's why you have a certificate. There is no database components, and this XBAP application goes to our, DBPipe server exe. All right. So this was one of the part of the demo. Now there's something quite interesting I want to show you. I think it can be useful. So I show you that. So I change this. I execute. Should it work? Question mark is because I didn't run my server, and as soon as I run my server, it started to work. Now, DBPipe IAS and XBAP client bindings change using MageUI. MageUI is a manifest tools from .NET, and you don't need to use it. However, I think it's interesting to know about it because you can actually duplicate configuration, change versions very quickly, maybe more quickly than going back to Team Developer and using the republish options, of the publisher here. Let me close that because I don't think I need it anymore. So we're going to edit DBPipe IAS. The ID now is I want to change. If we go, let's go and edit my DBPipe. What has been deployed is my DBPipe server, right? This one hasn't been used in my previous steps, right? Because I was using the desktop exe. Now I want to use DBPipe on IAS. So what I'm going to do is to edit the configuration. No, sorry, it's not this guy. It's on IMNetPub. Go there, www DBPipe, send to Notepad++, settings, language XML. And as you can see, is using the WS 2007 binding. Well, it's not that I don't like that, but I want to change that to use the net TCP/IP binding. So what I'm going to do is directly actually use, this endpoint. Okay, so I'm going to show it to you. There is not much difference. I shouldn't do any mistake though. Okay, let me just Control-V this. Not Control-V, sorry. Just one sec. Just doing mistakes. Endpoint, contract. Am I using the right things here? Just double check again. I'm just confused about name because sometimes it's easy to do mistakes with XML. Okay. Okay, so net TCP/IP binding, this is what I want to use or to listen as a protocol for DBPipe hosted on IAS. Now let me try to save it. If I didn't do any mistake, which I hope, remember the first time I wanted to test my DBPipe, I use exactly the same URL and see if my web service is functioning without getting me any error. So because I modify it, it actually gets reactivated, and here it shows up. So the WSDL also would work. The only difference now is I'm not using HTTPS anymore, HTTP, sorry, as a protocol, but as an FTP/IP. Now, if I do a mistake, just for the sake of it, not sure if I still have time, you get obviously an error, right? So let me save that. So you can actually change the bindings the way you want on the DBPipe server exe. The problem is now you need to do the same for the client part, right? Because let's see what the client exposed. So let's go there, of the XBAP application I'm talking here. So if I go there, I want to check what I'm using, because it matters that both server and client are set the same way. Over here, you can see that I'm using NetTCP/IP, and I'm using GM-Gameplay port 8000. So it's slightly different, because I don't want to use anymore desktop exe, DBPipe hosted, by itself, but I want to use the one of IAS. So basically, I'm gonna explain all that, but there is not much difference. The only things that change, as you can see, is NetTCP/IP and the URL actually, or the address if you prefer. Just to be really careful, the rest doesn't change, but this is just what I put in, Control-C. So let me change the endpoint and the contract. I do Control-V. Okay, NetTCP/IP, client, endpoint. So I think it should be okay. Now let me save that. What I did is to actually modify what has been deployed. Okay, let's give a try, and now let's see what happens. If let me clear the cache again, because otherwise it still would work, because it will use, well, it might not work, but it's a good idea anyway to clear the cache. Now let me see what happens if I run the application. Again, it downloads it, and I do have an error. Why do I have an error? And the error is hash validation. It's because I was tampering on the configuration of the deployed component, and that's a security issue. So what you can do to fix that, and this is where I'm going to introduce MageUI, I don't think I need these guys anymore, is you can use the MageUI tool, right? The idea is to reconstruct your manifest and your XBAP without actually having to republish, which is in a way nice, because you can actually tweak your configuration about bindings, about trying things, and so on. So what you can do is drag and drop the manifest there, and drag and drop the XBAP. At this point, what you can do is select them and just drop them, because obviously they're not good anymore with the change that I did, right? So let's quickly have a look there, because there's a couple interesting things. In the permission, you can see that we are using full trust, right? Because you get full access on the machine when the XBAP application is running. You can also see, what has been deployed there as a .deploy file, the application option, and so on. So the goal is simply that I recreate the manifest. Because we are full trust application, we are supposed to give the same, certificate that we are using by default, so which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I press OK, the manifest has been recreated. Now, about the XBAP, important is that you have to select the new manifest being generated. So I select it. By the way, you can change also the version as long as they match. It's also an easy way to change the version when you are doing demos of application that just have change of bindings or things like that. You don't have to republish them and all that, so it might go quicker. Well, anyway, it's up to you, but I think it's interesting talking about it. Now, what I'm going to do is to save, again, this, but now for the XBAP, in order to regenerate the XBAP, and my XBAP got generated. If I didn't do any mistake, in the bindings of my DBPipe now hosted on IAS, and the client, without using the DBPipe server exe, I will use fully on this machine DBPipe. So let me clear again the cache, open and run the application. Now let's see if we do have an error. We no longer have an error. That means that these things that I did with MageUI is functioning apparently. Now, is my application connecting to DBPipe properly? Let's have a look. It takes a bit sometimes. and now it works. So now see, I don't have my DBPipe server exe single instance, hosted by itself running there, but I'm fully using an XBAP application with IIS using the NetTCP/IP binding. Now, the last things, very quickly, I'm going to log off, and I'm going to show you this demo of XBAP and DBPipe IIS over the internet, because a lot of people might want to do this. Let me tell you that it wasn't possible with 6.0 simply because the only option was that it was requesting for credential, right? So the security of the web services were too tight for having an internet scenario. So I actually have to log out of here because since I'm clearing my cache and I don't want to download over the internet 30 meg, of XBAP application, so I'm gonna log in as support. Okay. Now I have another account over here, and let me introduce you, a public website. Over here you can see a remote desktop, which is win2k8aero.unify.com. Actually, you can even access yourself and actually test those demo at home if you want or whenever you feel like, or try even to further rate. Just what I want to show you is that I'm not connected to Unify at all. I'm just connecting to my home. This is my wireless network. And just for the sake of it, just want to show you that actually it's a bit slow because I'm over the internet, and you can see that in no way I'm connected to Unify. So what I'm going to show you is that I'm accessing directly, application over the internet. This is what I did, the web page, just for testing and also to try to myself to understand the technology for the DEFCON. Not only I'm talking about DBPipe, but I'm talking about web services, and also, some other things, specifically about XBAP and web services. Over here, I give some explanation about my GUI, so you might want to go at one point on this website. Well, the website is win2k8aero.unify.com, and over here, what I just want to show you is, here's my remote desktop, so show you the screen of my server, right, and here is the XBAP application on my virtual machine, which is XP, and I'm going to access it. So let me take the fastest scenario, which is Unified TCP/IP service. Now let me select SQL base. So everything's fine. Normally I should see activity there. See, you see activity. So over the internet, I'm actually making database transaction and using a deployed application, from the internet. It's obviously slower. I'm in Europe, it goes to the US. Notice that there is some little difference over here because the version is not the same. The version of Team Developer and the runtime that has got deployed from that server to my local machine, just because we're on a beta version. So obviously something is different over there. But what is nice is that you can see that the different versions are contained, right? So you can have multiple versions of different products because it's all contained in your deployment or what has been published, right? Now, the last things I want to show you, but that comes pretty much on the same, now is to use the same stuff as my demo, but through the internet. Now, DBPipe through the desktop exe. Here, there is also a desktop exe running, and here you can see that I'm connecting, right, little by little. And that's about it. So let me go back on the slides and ask you if you guys have questions.
If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A tool of WebEx. Currently, we are looking to release Team Developer 6.1 at the end of February of this year. So it's quite soon that you will have the ability to try all this on your own.
No question?
No, there's no questions, Jean-Marc. I think you covered everything.
Was very clear.
Oh, here's one. Reggie Ho, thank you for the demo. I'm impressed. So no question?
Thank you very much. I mean, it's very important for me even to understand, it was kind of a bit complicated. Customers are a bit confused right at the beginning, even about the XBAP things. I will tell you the truth. right from the beginning, I saw that the XBAP application actually runs on a server, but it's not the case. It runs on your client. And then on top of that you have DBPipe, especially at the time of the version 6.0. It was very confusing because people didn't know about this use remote connection. So, basically they were thinking, oh yeah, I'm using DBPipe, and they were extremely disappointed when they went on another machine saying, hey, well, it doesn't work. There were two reasons for that. Or at least, one reason is that because in 6.0, you have to be on the domain for this to work. There's no way you can make it work through the internet, neither through workgroup machine. And what is nice now is that you can see the desktop exe, and you can use different kind of bindings. It's possible in the future we put some other bindings for different scenarios. WCF is a monster. It's huge, for what I understand, and there are multiple bindings that we could use for different scenarios. It's very interesting. I find it very, very interesting.
Yes, in fact it is. And I think people will like to work with that as soon as they get their hands on TV6.
Well, there are a couple of big corporates, I will not tell you the name, that really wants to migrate to .NET because of this. Because of XBAP and the simplicity of deploying application and version of that application, plus the fact that they could not use any more client components on their local machine. Talking about 6,000 users, a corporate.
Yeah, that is certainly a finance aspect as well, because you certainly need to pay for Oracle clients, for example.
I didn't talk about performance. Actually, I encourage you also to see the presentation of Gary on the DEFCON, because he was giving some slides about performance. If you compare the pure transaction access, SQL, it's obviously a bit slower because there is other layers coming there, but not that much, right? And ask for some other people then ask us, okay, what about, scalability and all that? And in a way, I cannot possibly test all that by myself, so I cannot really say. The only things I tell you is that we are using VCF, we are using .NET applications, this is all Microsoft, we are talking about IaaS. I would suppose they are you have load balancing, it should be very scalable. So one of the questions I have is more about, performance and scalability.
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any further questions, so thank you very much, Jean-Marc. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and this webinar will be up on YouTube by tomorrow, and we will have that link on our website, of course. Thank you very much, everybody, again, and talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.